Good evening, and welcome to another Slipshod episode of Diatribes from the Voice of Doom. Now here's your illiterate and pedantical host, Voice of Doom. Hello. Dug this song up out of the dustbin. Bee Gees, old song. Gotta go back to the mid-60s. But I wanted to find a song that fit in with my subject for today. And it's not going to be about politics because we can wait till tomorrow for another calamity. I wanted to kind of do a innocuous, boring diatribe about literature and words. But on the plus side, these are all words I made up, so they're all new to you. So that might make it interesting, but I wanted to do some things I wanted to do about. I've been reading lately since I've been kind of single for the last year and a half. Had way more time to just do what I want, and I enjoy reading, and I always did. I knew I would want to read when I was 5. Nobody taught me until I got to school. And once I learned, then I went for it. I was reading stacks of books at a time. Because I love to read, and you can go into a different world. Dr. Seuss, loved it. All those kids' books. So I was a reader, and I want to tell you about the last serious book I read, which is called Giant by Edna Ferber. I saw it on the used bookshelf and I picked it up because I saw the movie and I liked it. And the book is nothing like the movie. And I won't go into detail, but I do want to read a passage. I know you'll find it boring, but it's interesting because this was written probably in the 50s for sure, because the movie was in 56. You don't remember, the movie was with Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, and James Dean, and an all-star cast. And it was a really good movie. It was James Dean's last movie, and he did a really good job on it. He would have been a superstar. He would have been one of the big actors in history, but he decided to go speeding down a highway and exploded. Copyright 52, okay. Now this is a story of a woman who was raised in Virginia in a very bourgeois setting. Father was a doctor. He was kind of intellectual. They were very prim and proper, and she, by happenstance, meets a Texas rancher and falls in love with him, and he just happens to own like 2 million acres. So the whole thing is built around, the upper echelon of people with money. They didn't worry about where their next meal was coming from, but sometimes the meals weren't that good because she didn't want to eat jerky all the time, steak every day. But I want to read this passage because I found it interesting. 1952, remember? Now, it's late in the book, and the in-laws are coming to the ranch from Virginia to visit, and they're totally from different worlds, but since everybody's kind of rich, it's like we can find common ground. And the mother of Leslie, who is the heroine in the story, is talking about how, for one thing, it's very interesting in the book because the Americans, the so-called white supremacists, which they kind of were back then, usurped and appropriated all the culture of the Mexicans and the Spanish, and they had all that in it, the food, the parties, they even spoke Spanish. Everything was Spanish. But still the Mexicans were lower. They were oppressed. They exploited. And this woman, Leslie, wants to change things because she sees it now. I'll set it up a little bit. When she first got there, she was really concerned about the Mexicans because they were living in hovels. She gets out of the car with her car man and goes to a hovel because she hears crying and finds out the mother is giving birth or something, and she's in a dirt hovel shack tent. And she thinks that's atrocious, and just the baby ends up dying. I don't know. I don't want to go back into it, but she was concerned. Now, I'll just read a little. The mother is talking to her daughter, who's the wife of the Texas rancher. And the mother's kind of hoity-toity, and she's a bit of a Karen. And she says, when I get back home, I'm going to send Mitty down. You remember Mitty, Caroline's daughter. She's every bit as good a cook now as Caroline, and in some ways better. No, Mama, it wouldn't do. You owe it to your children. I saw Jordy yesterday with that weird little Mexican girl he's always playing with. They were both eating tortillas as if it were bread and butter. So it is, in a way. The visiting Lintons and Carfreys usually drove over from the big house before dinner there to lounge in comparative coolness on the main house veranda. There were always tall ice drinks. The Gulf breeze filtered through vines and screens. The voices of the children came pleasantly from the far end of the veranda. It was the most relaxed hour of the day. It was the time Leslie liked best. Bick, who's the rancher, was always at his most charming. Lacey, her sister, was full of her day's doings. Her father and mother had learned to accept for her this strange life of hardship and fantastic luxury. The Carfreys were frankly having the time of their lives. Besides, Leslie now said, continuing her conversation with her mother, that weird little Mexican girl isn't a girl at all. She's a boy. Mrs. Linton turned to stare at the distant children. I don't believe it. Bick called to them, Jordy, Angel, Benica. The two came reluctantly, Jordy to stand at his mother's side, her hand on his shoulder, the other child stopping short of the group. Weird, Nancy Linton had said. Now the group of adults gazed at the dark, small Mexican child, and the child stared back at him poised lightly like a tiny fawn, as though ready to dart off a sound, a hostile glance. Fawn-like, three-cornered eyes due to a slight lift or pinch in the center of the upper eyelid. The little figure was bony of shank, flat of chest, the hands strong and big bone sticking out of the stuff of the sleeves. A small boy's hands, a small boy's legs, a small boy's chest and eyes, and the bones of the alert face and the well-shaped head were those of a boy. But the dress, with its Mexican ruffles and its petticoats and the red hair ribbons, all this was the garb of a girl, and the long black hair was neatly brushed and braided. It shone with brushing and with unguents, unlike the thick, careless locks of other small Mexican ranch children. This is Angel Obregon, Leslie said, and smiled at the boy, the son of Angel Obregon, who was a vaquero here at Riata. And she held out her hand to him as he spoke, and to draw him to her side, Jordy, her own son. But the boy only looked at her and did not move. In her halting Spanish, Leslie said, won't you say good evening, Angel? Buenos tardes, señoras, señores. Señores comes first in Spanish, honey, Bick reminded her. Now Angel's black eyes were strangely sparked with determination. The black jaw was set with fierce effort. The lips opened, the whole face took on animation and purpose. Good evening, sirs. Good evening, madamas. In a triumph of stumbling English. Then, with a shriek of hysterical laughter, he was off. Jordy, too, broke away. The two could be heard down the veranda howling at the splendid joke. I'll skip a little bit. It was obvious that Leigh Carfrey was busy taking mental notes on the habits and dress of the Mexican child in Texas. Mrs. Linton was quivering with disapproval. Leslie Litton, will you tell me the reason for dressing a child like that day after day playing with Geordie? I suppose it does seem queer, Leslie agreed. We're used to it. Tell them, Bick urged her. It's quite a story. Leslie took a little fortified sip of his cold drink. Well, the first day I arrived in Texas, a bride, I started out for a morning walk in my youth and innocence to see the sights. Dear me, said Dr. Horace. Finally I began to feel like a wanderer dying of thirst in the desert, and I stumbled into one of the Mexican houses. I heard a baby crying there. The woman was in bed ill. It was her baby, crying. The baby was little Angel there, not a word of English. But I understood her, sort of, just the same. We'd become great friends since then, and later I learned about her and her baby. She'd been married almost 3 years with no baby, which for a Mexican girl is practically a disgrace. She was ill a good deal, but finally this child was expected. They knew what had caused all the trouble, of course. One night Angel had left his hat on the bed, and everybody knew that is bad luck. So Deluvina, the wife, paid for special masses, and she had taken herb medicines, and the midwife had massaged her on the tree of petition. She had hung a little cradle made of bits of mesquite wood, and in it she had put a tiny doll dressed as a baby girl because she thought they were being punished for wanting only a boy all these years. She prayed morning and night and in between, and she promised God that she would humbly be grateful for a girl or a boy, and that in either case its hair would be tended and brushed and anointed, and when it was a foot long it would be cut off and given as a thank offering to God. You can't know what that means. Mexican girls don't cut their hair. It is their glory. The child's name was to be Angelina, and Angelina was born, and she was a boy. But the promise had been made to God by Deluvina and by Angel Obregon kneeling before the altar. They named him Angel after his father. They let his hair grow. An angel was dressed as a girl, and his hair was always tied with a red ribbon, as you've seen it, and washed and brushed and anointed, for it belonged to God. I'm not going to go on because it's getting too long, but you get the picture. Things happen. There's weirdness. Now, if you want to know what happened to the boy who was raised as a girl for 5 years, he went into the service in World War II and went to Guadalcanal and was blown up and brought back in a box, because the doctor said either he's going to be totally weird for the rest of his life or he's going to overcompensate and be the most manly man of all time. So take from that what you will. His literature's incredible, man. You just check it out. And before this episode's over, since I bored you to tears, I will catch you up on my dictionary that I'm writing. Give you a few. You can go back in my diatribes, but I'm going to give it to you all at once. My new words that I've come up with, because the dictionary does not contain the proper words to describe the madness and the absolute insanity of what we're facing today. So here's a few words I made up. Acerb illumination means enlightenment through sarcasm. That's me. Acerb illuminating. Tragifascination is a strange attraction to disaster. And we've all felt that. We've watched things happen and we just watch and it's like, wow, this is interesting. These buildings are coming down. Hyper-celebrity. An overnight sensation on steroids. That's when somebody does a video and suddenly they're the most famous person on earth. Impunicity is a famous one. I've used it over and over again. The act of being hypocritical with duplicitousness with impunity. The act of being hypocritical with duplicity with impunity. That means you're a total hypocrite and you do it in front of everybody and everybody knows you're doing it and you never get punished. An impunicrite is a person who is blatantly hypocritical and duplicitous. Openly. How many politicians can we name that are impunicrits? Plenty. Mass paraconformity is the act of quickly conforming en masse to strange new behavior due to an inexplicable event. mass para-conformity. You conform in mass to something strange just because they tell you to do it. Cravadulation is a craven craving for approval, and we've seen that with all kinds of people from the top to bottom. I want approval. I want applause. I don't care how many people I have to kill. A moronocracy, we just did that a few episodes ago, ruled by the stupidest. That's my own word, moronocracy. Ruled by the stupidest people. And I came up with one yesterday because I was watching one of my diatribes, and I was just kind of drunk and speaking slow, but I was still kind of ranting, so I came up with a new word that I couldn't find in the dictionary. It's called subdrage. Subdrage. It's a verb or a noun. It means low-key ranting. It means you're just having a cow, but you're kind of sotto voce, you might say. I call it subdrage. That's what I have. I have a few others here and there and everywhere, but those are my main ones. I'm starting to get into literature because books are great, and I wish teachers would get off their high horse and, they can have green hair, but, decide what sex they are, go into class and be that, and teach reading, instead of making it a big, psychosexual, psychoanalytical, big thing with 6-year-olds. We're going to discuss my sex life, and your reading and arithmetic can come later. So, I'm sorry, that whole thing took up the whole diatribe, but it's interesting, 1952. And read the book, Giant, it's good. And watch the movie, really good. You youngsters don't know what you're missing with the old stuff. So I'll leave it there. I'm sorry it was boring, but I'll just put this in one of my worst ones. Alright, good night, and happy reading.